A rich son owner of a famous city rodeo plans to use his most fierce horse to get rid of his wheelchair-bound mother. But the cruel plan turns into a scene that no one could predict, as what the horse did left everyone speechless. The smell of leather and dust mingled with the aroma of barbecue smoke that drifted through the small town of Harmony Creek, Texas, as the distant twang of a steel guitar echoed from the local bars that Friday afternoon. Helen Mendoza adjusted her wheelchair on the porch of her house, watching the growing bustle on Main Street. In 3 weeks, the biggest rodeo of the year would take place, and the entire town was buzzing with anticipation. At 68, Helen carried in her eyes the wisdom of someone who had lived every decade intensely. Her calloused hands told stories of hard work on the family ranch before the accident that had left her in a wheelchair 5 years ago. Even so, her posture remained erect, dignified, radiating a strength that impressed everyone who knew her. "Mom, I need to talk to you." Robert's harsh voice echoed through the house, making Helen sigh deeply. Her only son, now 40, had become a stranger to her. The sweet boy who used to run through the fields chasing butterflies had transformed into a cold man, obsessed with the money and power his business empire afforded him. Robert appeared on the porch, his impeccable suit clashing with the rural setting. His eyes, once bright like a curious child's, now reflected only calculation and ambition. Helen felt a familiar shiver run down her spine. The same feeling she got when the ranch animals sensed a storm was coming. "I heard you've been talking to that retired nurse again," he said, crossing his arms. "Mrs. Silver has nothing better to do with her life than make up stories about our family." Helen studied her son's face intently. After decades of raising animals, she had learned to read imperceptible signs: the tension in the nostrils, the different glint in the eyes, the stiffness of the muscles. Robert showed all the signs of someone hiding dangerous secrets. "She just worries about me, son, like any good neighbor would." Helen kept her voice serene, though her heart was racing. "Why does it bother you so much?" "It doesn't bother me." The answer came too quickly, confirming her suspicions. "I just think you should be more selective with your friends. Some people are a bad influence." A small, stray dog approached the porch, limping slightly on its back leg. Helen smiled and held out her hand, and the animal immediately calmed down, nuzzling its snout against her fingers. It was always like this. Animals recognized her genuine kindness and sought her presence. Robert watched the scene with clear irritation. "That mangy dog again. I'm going to call animal control to pick it up." "You'll do no such thing." The firmness in Helen's voice made Robert take a step back. "All beings deserve compassion, Robert. That's something I thought I taught you." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Helen could feel her son's internal conflict. There were moments, fleeting ones, when she could still glimpse the sweet boy behind the mask of coldness. But those moments were becoming increasingly rare. "I have to travel next week," Robert finally said. "Business in Dallas. Will you be okay on your own?" "I always am." Helen patted the dog's head. "But you seem very on edge lately. Any trouble with the business?" The question hit Robert like a physical blow. His muscles visibly tensed, and Helen knew she had touched a nerve, a very sensitive one. "My business is doing just fine, thank you." He turned and headed back into the house. "And Mom, it would be good if you stopped asking questions about things you don't understand." As Robert disappeared inside, Helen remained on the porch, stroking the little dog that had settled beside her chair. The wind carried the distant sound of country music, but also something more subtle, the ominous feeling that a storm was approaching. Her instincts, honed by decades of living with animals and people, had never failed her. And now they were screaming a warning that made her blood run cold. Her own son was planning something terrible, something that could change their lives forever. The following week brought an unusual restlessness to the Mendoza house. From her privileged position in the living room, Helen observed Robert's strange movements. He took calls at odd hours, always stepping away to speak in a low voice, and had visitors who arrived through the back door, avoiding the neighbors' eyes. On Monday morning, while Helen was having her coffee, she overheard fragments of a phone conversation that made her blood run cold. Robert was talking about solving the problem once and for all, and mentioned those damn documents. When he noticed she was listening, he immediately ended the call and left the house without saying goodbye. Martha Silver, the 62-year-old retired nurse, arrived for her weekly visit shortly after lunch. Her experienced eyes, trained by decades of caring for patients, immediately noticed the tension on Helen's face. "You look different today," Martha said, pulling up a chair to sit closer. "Did something happen?" Helen hesitated. How could she explain that she was afraid of her own son without sounding like a paranoid mother? Robert's been acting very strange. Whispered conversations, secret meetings. And yesterday he asked a strange question about some documents I'm keeping in my room. Martha frowned. During her years as a nurse at the town hospital, she had witnessed many situations of family neglect. She had developed a keen instinct for identifying when something wasn't right. "What kind of documents?" "Old papers from his company. Robert asked me to keep them years ago, said it was safer. At the time, I thought it was just a precaution. But now..." Helen trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Now you think it might be something more serious." Helen's silence was answer enough. Martha held her hand gently, noticing how it trembled slightly. "Helen, you need to trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, we need to find out what it is." At that moment, the front door burst open. Robert stormed in, his eyes immediately fixing on Martha with poorly disguised hostility. "Mrs. Silver, what a surprise to find you here again." His voice dripped with sarcasm. "I didn't realize retired nurses made so many house calls." "I came to visit a friend," Martha replied firmly, unintimidated by his aggressive tone. "Helen has always been well loved by everyone in town." "I'm sure she has." Robert forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But I think my mother needs her rest. She's been a bit confused lately, you know. Her age." Helen felt her face flush with anger. "Robert! It's true, Mom. You've been making up strange stories, saying things that don't make sense." He turned directly to Martha. "Perhaps it would be best if your visits became more spaced out, for her own good." Martha stood up slowly, her professional experience immediately recognizing the isolation tactics some family members used. "When Helen is lucid and perfectly capable of deciding who can visit her." "Of course she is," Robert laughed without humor. "But as her only son and caregiver, I think I know what's best for her mental health." The tension in the room was palpable. Helen felt torn between embarrassment and outrage. How dare her own son speak of her as if she were mentally incompetent? "Robert, you're being rude to our guest." "I'm being protective of my mother." He crossed his arms, making it clear he wouldn't back down. "Mrs. Silver, I appreciate your concern, but it's not necessary." Martha looked at Helen, who nodded discreetly. She understood it was best to leave for now, but not before making her message clear. "Helen, you know where to find me if you need anything at all." She picked up her purse and headed for the door. "Robert, I hope you remember that your mother is a strong, intelligent woman who deserves to be treated with respect." After Martha left, silence filled the house. Robert stood in the middle of the room, breathing heavily, as if he had just fought a battle. "Why did you do that?" Helen asked, her voice thick with sadness. "Do what? Protect you from nosy gossips who just want to stick their noses in our business?" "You were cruel to a woman who has always been kind to us." Robert moved closer to Helen's chair, his face taking on an expression she had never seen before, cold, calculating, almost threatening. "Mom, there are things you don't understand. People who can cause problems for our family. Mrs. Silver is one of those people." "What problems, Robert? What are you so afraid of?" The question hung in the air like a dark omen, and Helen knew with absolute certainty that her life was about to change forever. Pete was only 12, but his experiences on the streets of Harmony Creek had taught him lessons many adults took decades to learn. As skinny as a sparrow, with disheveled hair and patched-up clothes, he knew every corner of the town, every whispered conversation in the alleys, every secret people thought they were keeping. On Tuesday morning, while looking for empty bottles to sell for lunch money, Pete hid behind a stack of crates in the loading dock behind the hardware store. It was one of his favorite hiding spots, especially when the store owner, known for his generosity, left out some day-old bread for him. That's when he heard familiar voices talking on the other side of the thin wall. One was unmistakable: Robert Mendoza, the rich man who always treated him like he was invisible. The other belonged to John J.B. Batista, a rodeo hand Pete knew by sight, a 45-year-old man with a reputation for taking any job for money. "Do you understand what needs to be done?" Robert's voice sounded tense, different from the arrogant tone he used in public. "I understand, boss, but—" J.B. hesitated, and Pete could hear the nervousness in his voice. "It's just that Miss Helen has always been good to me. When my boy got sick, she even sent medicine over to our house." "Forget that cheap sentimentality." Robert sounded impatient. "You have a family to support, don't you? Your wife's out of a job. Your kids need school supplies, clothes, food. This job will solve all your problems." Pete's heart pounded. Miss Helen was the only person in town who always paid him real attention. When he showed up on her porch, skinny and hungry, she never sent him away. Instead, she always found a plate of hot food and a few dollars for him and talked to him like he was somebody important. But pushing her chair into the arena during the rodeo, J.B. seemed to be fighting with himself. What if she gets really hurt? What if the bull— "Black Devil is known for his ferocity," Robert interrupted coldly. "But accidents happen at rodeos. Everyone knows that. It will just be another unfortunate tragedy." Pete's blood ran cold. Black Devil was the most feared bull in the entire region, an animal that had already injured several experienced riders. The thought of Miss Helen being pushed near that beast made him feel sick. "I don't know if I can do it, boss." "You'll do it because you have no choice." Robert's voice took on a threatening tone that made Pete shrink further behind the crates. $50,000, J.B. That's more money than you'd make in 5 years on the rodeo circuit. And if you try to cross me or tell anyone— "I won't cross you, boss. It's just nothing. On rodeo day, when I give the signal, you push her chair right when Black Devil is at his wildest. It will look like a terrible, but necessary, accident." Pete clamped his hands over his mouth to stop a horrified gasp from escaping. The rich man was planning to hurt Miss Helen, the only person who had ever been kind to him, and worse, he wanted to do it using the most dangerous bull in the region. And after, you take your money and disappear from town for a few weeks. When you come back, you'll just be another worker who witnessed an unfortunate tragedy. The footsteps moved away, leaving Pete alone with the terrible knowledge he had just discovered. His hands trembled as he tried to process what he'd heard. Robert wanted to harm his own mother, and he had found someone desperate enough to help him. The boy slipped out of his hiding spot, checking to make sure the area was clear. He had to warn Miss Helen, but who would believe him? He was just a street kid, with no family, no credibility. If he told the adults, they'd probably think he was making up stories for attention. But Miss Helen always listened to him. She looked him in the eye when she spoke to him, treated his words as if they had value. Maybe she was the only person who would believe him. Pete ran through the dusty streets, dodging cars and people's eye, with only one thought pounding in his head. He had to save the woman who had always treated him like a human being. Even if no one else believed him, even if everyone thought he was just a street kid making up stories, he wouldn't let them hurt Miss Helen. When he reached the Mendoza house, panting and sweaty, he saw Robert leaving through the front door. The man shot him a look of disdain before getting into his imported car. never imagining that his cruel plans had been discovered by the attentive ears of an invisible child. Helen lay awake all of Tuesday night, replaying every strange detail of Robert's behavior over the past few weeks. When the first ray of sun entered her bedroom window, she had already made a decision that could change everything. She needed to examine the documents Robert had asked her to store years ago. With careful movements, she maneuvered her wheelchair to the old, solid wood wardrobe. In the bottom, behind blankets she hadn't used in years, was the shoebox that held her son's papers. Robert had always said they were just backup company files. But now Helen suspected there was much more to that vague explanation. Her hands trembled as she opened the box. What she found inside made her world crumble. Fraudulent contracts with neighboring counties, forged documents from public bids, proof of payments to non-existent employees, spreadsheets detailing money laundering schemes through shell companies. The extent of Robert's corruption was far greater than she could have ever imagined. A separate folder contained correspondence with influential politicians, records of bribes paid to secure multi-million-dollar contracts, and what was worse, veiled threats to people who had tried to expose his schemes. Helen recognized some of the names, local businessmen who had changed their minds about competing for bids, journalists who had stopped investigating irregularities in public works projects. "My God," she whispered, holding a document that detailed a $2 million bribe for the construction of a school that was never finished. "What have you become, my son?" Among the papers, Helen found something that made her feel even more nauseous. Handwritten notes from Robert about problems to be solved. A list included the names of potential witnesses, and at the end, written in her son's nervous handwriting, was, "Mom knows too much. Permanent solution needed." Her hands dropped the paper as if it were on fire. Robert not only knew she possessed evidence against him, he was planning to do something terrible to stop her from using it. The sound of the front door opening sent Helen into a panic. Robert was back early from his business trip. With quick movements, she put the documents back in the box and hid it again. But she couldn't completely hide her agitation. "Mom, where are you?" Robert's voice echoed through the house. "In my room," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Robert appeared at the door, his eyes immediately scanning the room as if looking for something out of place. "Pinton, are you all right? You look pale." "Just tired. I didn't sleep well." He walked into the room, getting dangerously close to the wardrobe. Helen's heart pounded when she saw Robert glance in the direction where the documents were hidden. "Mom, I need to ask you something." His voice was too casual to be natural. "Those papers I left with you to keep, do you remember where they are?" "What papers?" Helen forced a confused expression, praying he wouldn't see through her lie. "The company documents, some old contracts." Robert moved closer, and Helen could see the sweat on his brow. "I need them for an audit." "Oh, right, those." Helen pretended to try to remember. "I think they're in the storage shed with other old things." "Why the rush?" "No rush, just getting things organized." But the tension in his voice said otherwise. Robert began to scan the room with his eyes, looking for signs that she had touched something. Helen forced herself to remain calm, but inside she felt like she was sitting on a powder keg. "Robert, are you okay? You seem very nervous." "I'm fine." He stopped in front of her, studying her face with a disturbing intensity. "Mom, have you been talking to anyone about my business? Maybe that nosy nurse." "Why would I do that?" "I don't know. Sometimes people get confused. Say things they shouldn't." There was a subtle threat in his words. "It would be very bad if someone started spreading rumors about our family." Helen understood. She was walking a tightrope over a chasm. Robert was no longer the son she knew. He was a dangerous man, capable of anything to protect his secrets. "I would never do anything to hurt you," she said, and that was true. Even knowing his crimes, the part of her that was still a mother fought against the need to turn her own son over to the law. I hope not. Robert kissed her forehead, but the gesture felt more like a threat than affection. Because some words, once spoken, can't be taken back, and the consequences can be permanent. When he left the room, Helen was left alone with the terrible weight of her discovery. Her son wasn't just a criminal. He was willing to silence her permanently to protect his secrets, and from the tone of his last sentence, she suspected that her time to act was running out fast. The box of documents burned in its hiding place like a time bomb, and Helen knew she would soon be forced to make the most difficult decision of her life. The next morning, Helen was on her porch when she saw Pete approaching the house. The boy seemed more agitated than usual, constantly looking over his shoulder as if he were being followed. His clothes were dirtier than usual, and she noticed scratches on his thin arms. "Miss Helen," he whispered, climbing the porch steps in quick strides, "I need to tell you something really important." Helen immediately saw the fear in the boy's eyes. In the 3 years she had known him, she had never seen him so scared. "What happened, sweetie?" Pete looked around, making sure they were alone. "Indeed, it's about your son, Miss Helen. Yesterday, I heard him talking to J.B. Batista, that rodeo hand." Helen's heart skipped a beat. J.B. was known in town as a hard-working man, but one who'd been struggling financially since his wife lost her job. "What did you hear? They're planning something really bad on rodeo day." The words tumbled out of Pete's mouth. "Your son Robert wants J.B. to push your chair into the arena when Black Devil is in there." Helen felt her blood run cold. Black Devil was the most feared bull in the region, known for his aggression and unpredictability. Anyone in a wheelchair near him would be in mortal danger. "Are you sure of what you heard?" "I'm sure, Miss Helen. They talked about giving J.B. money, a lot of money, and your son said it would look like an accident." Pete grabbed her hand with his small, dirty ones. "I can't let anyone hurt you." Helen closed her eyes, trying to process the information. It all fit together perfectly. Robert's nervousness, the questions about the documents, the attempts to socially isolate her. He really was planning to get rid of her once and for all. "Pete, have you told anyone else this?" "I tried to tell the sheriff, but he said I was making up stories for attention. I told the priest, but he said I must have misunderstood." The boy hung his head, frustrated. "Nobody believes me because I'm just a street kid." Helen felt a wave of tenderness for the brave boy who was trying to save her. "I believe you, sweetie, and I'm so grateful you told me. Are you going to run away? Are you going to hide until after the rodeo?" "It's not that simple." Helen sighed deeply. "But we'll find a way to handle this." At that moment, the sound of an approaching car made them both look toward the street. Robert's black car was arriving, and Helen saw the panic in Pete's eyes. "He can't see me here," the boy whispered. "If he knows that I know, go through the back of the house. Quickly." Helen pointed to the path that led to the yard. "And Pete, thank you for being my guardian angel." The boy disappeared around the back of the house just seconds before Robert parked the car. When he walked up to the porch, Helen forced herself to appear calm, but she could feel the cold sweat running down her back. "Good morning, Mom. How did you sleep?" "Fine," she lied. "And you? Did you take care of your business?" Robert studied her face intently, as if looking for signs that something had changed. "I did. Actually, I was thinking, what if you didn't go to the rodeo this year?" The suggestion was disguised as concern, but Helen recognized the manipulative attempt. "Why wouldn't I? I've never missed a rodeo in Harmony Creek. It's just that you seem so fragile lately. All that crowd, the noise, the dust. It might not be good for your health." "My health is just fine, thank you." Robert clenched his fists, clearly frustrated by her resistance. "Mom, sometimes you need to accept that you can't do certain things anymore. It's not safe." "Not safe?" Helen looked him straight in the eye. "What exactly do you think could happen to me at a rodeo?" The question caught Robert by surprise. For a split second, she saw something flash across his eyes. Guilt, fear, maybe regret. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the cold mask he had learned to wear. "Accidents happen, Mom. especially to vulnerable people. The word hung in the air like a threat. Helen understood there was no longer any doubt. Her own son was planning her death, and the rodeo was only 2 weeks away. "I see," she said calmly, "but I still plan on going. I've always been a brave woman, Robert. I'm not going to stop now." The look Robert gave her was cold enough to make Helen tremble inside. She had just declared war on her own son, and they both knew that only one of them would come out of this battle victorious, John Jay. Bidain Batista couldn't sleep. For 3 straight nights, he tossed and turned in bed while his wife, Maria, slept beside him, oblivious to the torment consuming her husband. The $50,000 promised by Robert could solve all their family's financial problems, but the price seemed far too high. On Friday morning, a week before the rodeo, J.B. was mending a fence on a farmer's property when Robert pulled up in his imported car. The businessman got out with the serious expression of someone coming to collect a debt. "We need to talk," Robert said without preamble. J.B. looked around, making sure they were alone. "Boss, I was thinking. I don't want to know what you were thinking." Robert cut him off sharply. "I want to know if you're going to hold up your end of our deal. It's just that Miss Helen has always been good to my family. You know, when my youngest got sick, she even sent medicine to our house. Didn't charge a thing." Robert laughed without humor. "How touching. Are you going to throw away $50,000 over a bottle of cough syrup?" "It's not just that, boss. It's—" J.B. hesitated, searching for the right words. "Hurting a helpless old woman? It's not right." "You know what's not right?" Robert stepped closer, his posture threatening. "A grown man who can't provide for his own family. Your wife has been out of work for months, your kids need new clothes for school, and you're here talking to me about conscience." J.B. lowered his head, feeling the weight of the words. It was true that their financial situation was desperate. Maria worked miracles to stretch the little money he earned from odd jobs, but they couldn't keep going like this for much longer. "I know things are tough, but nothing." Robert pulled an envelope from his jacket's inner pocket. "Here's $5,000 as an advance. You'll get the rest after the job is done." J.B. stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "And what if I say I don't want to be a part of this anymore?" Robert's smile vanished completely. "That would be a very unwise decision on your part, especially considering you've already accepted the job and know details that, let's say, would be problematic if they reached the wrong ears." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm being realistic. You know my reputation in this town, J.B. When I make a deal, I expect it to be honored. And when someone tries to cross me..." Robert left the sentence hanging, but the implication was clear. J.B. felt a chill in his gut. Everyone in the region knew that Robert Mendoza was a powerful man, with political influence and connections in every sphere of society. Making an enemy of him would be professional suicide, and perhaps even worse. "My family has nothing to do with this. Your family has everything to do with this. They're the reason you're going to do what we agreed on." Robert forced the envelope into J.B.'s hands. "1 week, J.B. Next Saturday, during Black Devil's ride, you do your part, and we're all happy." After Robert left, J.B. stood alone with the envelope in his hands, feeling like Judas with his 30 pieces of silver. The money could solve his family's immediate problems, but he knew he would never be able to look at himself in the mirror again without feeling disgust. When he got home that night, Maria immediately noticed that something was different. Did something happen at work? J.B. showed her the envelope of cash. "I got an extra job for next weekend. It'll be enough to buy the kids school clothes and still have some left over." "What kind of job is it?" Maria asked, her mother's intuition on high alert. "Helping with the rodeo setup. Nothing major." But Maria had known her husband for 15 years and could tell when he was lying. "J.B., this money, where did it come from?" "From Mr. Robert. He gave me an advance." "Robert Mendoza." Maria's tone changed instantly. JB. That man has a bad reputation in town. People say a lot of things. What matters is that he pays well. Maria cupped her husband's face in her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. John Batista, do you swear to me you're not getting into something dangerous? JB looked away, unable to lie directly to the woman he loved. It's just a job, Maria, just a job. But they both knew there was more to this easy money than met the eye. And as their children played in the yard, oblivious to the unfolding drama, JB wondered if there was any amount of money in the world that could justify what Robert was asking him to do. There were 7 days left until the rodeo, and the weight of the decision he had to make was crushing his soul little by little. The discovery that would change everything happened by chance, on a rainy Sunday morning, as Helen decided to organize her personal belongings. While rummaging through an old drawer in her desk, her fingers brushed against something that shouldn't have been there, a cell phone she had never seen before. With trembling hands, Helen turned on the device. The screen showed several unread text messages, all addressed to a contact saved only as PE. Her curiosity overcame her hesitation, and she opened the messages. What she read made her blood run cold. Detailed conversations between Robert and someone about wire transfers to overseas accounts, schedules for suspicious deliveries, and most shockingly, discussions about the elimination of inconvenient witnesses. One of the most recent messages read, "The old woman problem will be solved Saturday. After that, we'll be free to proceed with the Dallas operation." Helen realized she had found the phone Robert used for his criminal activities, probably forgotten there during one of his visits to her room. But the messages revealed something far more serious than she had imagined. Robert wasn't just involved in local corruption. He was part of a criminal network that spanned several states. Just as she was about to read more, the sound of footsteps in the living room alerted her. Robert had arrived and was heading to her room. With quick movements, Helen turned off the phone and hid it among the blankets on her bed, pretending to be napping when he appeared at the door. "Mom, have you seen a cell phone around here? A small, black one?" Helen forced a sleepy expression. "A cell phone? I haven't seen one." Robert scanned the room with his eyes, clearly agitated. Losing that phone could compromise his entire operation. "Are you sure? It's very important that I find it." "Why do you have 2 cell phones, Robert?" The question caught him off guard. "I only have one, but you're holding one right now." Helen pointed to the regular phone he always used. "Why are you looking for another?" Robert realized he had contradicted himself. It's for work. A company phone." "I see." Helen kept her tone casual, but she could see the desperation growing in her son's eyes. "Maybe you left it in the car." After Robert ran out to check his vehicle, Helen quickly turned the phone back on and photographed the most incriminating messages with her own cell. It was enough evidence to destroy not only Robert, but the entire criminal network he was part of. When Robert returned, having failed to find the device, his expression was one of barely concealed panic. "Mom, if you find that phone, it's very important that you give it to me immediately. Don't touch anything. Don't try to turn it on. It's confidential." "Of course, son, if it turns up, I'll let you know." But Helen had already made a decision. While Robert searched the house for the phone, she sent a message to Martha from her own phone. "I need to see you urgently. It's about Robert. Come as soon as you can." Martha arrived an hour later, finding Helen visibly shaken. "What happened?" Helen showed her the photographs of the messages. "Robert isn't just corrupt, Martha. He's part of something much bigger and much more dangerous." Martha read the messages with growing horror. "Helen, this is evidence of a criminal conspiracy. You need to take this to the FBI immediately." "And his plan for the rodeo? Pete told me Robert wants to use JB Batista to push me into the arena. Then we have to stop that no matter what." Martha held Helen's hand. "But first, you need to get out of this house. It's not safe to stay here." "Where would I go? This is my home, Martha. This is where I've always lived." Helen, your son is planning to kill you. You can't just stay here and wait for him to carry out his plan." At that moment, they both heard the sound of a key in the front door lock. Robert was back, and from the sound of his hurried footsteps, he was even more agitated than before. "Hide those pictures," Martha whispered. "And hide that phone." Helen quickly put the burner phone back under the blankets and deleted the photos from her own phone, but not before sending them to an email address only she knew. Robert appeared at the bedroom door, his gaze immediately going to Martha. "Mrs. Silver, what a surprise to find you here again." "I came to pay a courtesy call," Martha replied calmly. "How kind. But now I need some privacy with my mother. We have family matters to discuss." Martha looked at Helen, who gave a discreet nod. It was better for her to leave for now, but they both knew the situation had changed drastically. Robert was no longer just an ungrateful son. He was a dangerous criminal who needed to be stopped. "See you later, Helen," Martha said, squeezing her hand in a way that conveyed support and determination. When they were alone, Robert closed the bedroom door and approached Helen's bed. "Mom, I need you to tell me the truth. Did you touch anything in here?" Helen looked him straight in the eye. "Why would I touch anything?" "Because someone took something that belongs to me, something very important." The tension in the air was palpable. Helen knew she was playing a dangerous game, but she also knew she now had weapons to defend herself. The real battle was just beginning. The week leading up to the rodeo was marked by a growing tension that seemed to contaminate the entire town of Harmony Creek. Helen could barely eat, knowing that Robert was increasing the pressure on J.B. Batista with each passing day. Martha had become her daily visitor, always inventing excuses to be present and dissuade any attempt by Robert to completely isolate his mother. On Tuesday, Pete showed up on the porch with worrying news. "Miss Helen, I saw J.B. Batista in the town square today. He was crying. Helen's heart ached. J.B. was a proud man who never showed weakness in public. He was sitting alone on a bench near the church, with his head in his hands. When he saw me, he wiped his face real quick, but I could see he was very sad." Helen understood that Robert was increasing the psychological pressure on the rodeo hand. The guilt of involving an innocent man in his criminal plans weighed on her as heavily as the fear for her own safety. "Pete, you have a very important mission," she said, taking a few bills from her purse. "I want you to go to J.B.'s house and give this to his wife. Tell her it's to help with the kids' expenses. But Miss Helen, you don't have much money. I have enough to help a family that's struggling." Helen held the boy's hand. "And tell Maria that if J.B. needs to talk to someone, he can find Mrs. Martha. She'll understand." When Pete left to carry out his mission, Helen was left alone with her torturous thoughts. She knew Robert was weaving a web of blackmail and manipulation, using J.B.'s financial desperation to turn him into a weapon against her. On Wednesday, the situation became even more complicated. Robert came home accompanied by two men Helen had never seen before. They were intimidating-looking individuals, with expensive clothes but cold expressions, who spoke in low voices and addressed Robert with a deference that made it clear who was really in charge. "Mom, these are my partners from Dallas." Robert introduced them, but his voice trembled slightly. They came for the rodeo. Helen greeted the men politely, but her survival instincts were screaming danger. These were not ordinary businessmen, they were professional criminals. And their presence in town could only mean that Robert's plans had become more serious and dangerous. "Miss Helen," said the taller of the men, with a sharp, big-city accent, "your son speaks very highly of you. An admirable woman, from what we hear." "Thank you," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. "We hope you enjoy the rodeo on Saturday. It's going to be unforgettable." The way he pronounced the word unforgettable sent a chill down Helen's spine. These men knew about Robert's plan and were here to ensure it was executed. That night, After the visitors had left, Robert approached Helen with an expression she had never seen before, a mix of desperation and determination that frightened her deeply. "Mum, I need you to understand something. Saturday isn't just about the rodeo. It's about the future of our family, about business deals that are bigger than you can imagine." "What kind of business, Robert?" "The kind that can either make us very rich or destroy us completely." He knelt beside her chair, trying to seem like the caring son he once was. "There are people who don't accept failure, Mom. People who don't forgive weakness." Helen realized that Robert was trying to justify what he intended to do, seeking her understanding or perhaps her forgiveness in advance. "Are you afraid of them?" "I'm being realistic, and you should be too." "What does that mean?" Robert stood up, returning to his usual coldness. "It means that Saturday will be an important day for all of us. And after it, a lot of things are going to change." On Thursday, Martha brought news that confirmed Helen's worst fears. "I spoke with Maria J.B.'s wife. She's desperate, says her husband isn't eating, isn't sleeping, and has been acting like a condemned man. Robert is destroying an entire family's life to get what he wants. Worse than that, Helen. Maria told me that strange men were at their house yesterday, talking to J.B. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she said her husband was even more distraught afterward." Helen closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility. "They're using his family as collateral. If J.B. doesn't do what they want." "Exactly. And that means his plan is going to work. Helen, J.B. will have no choice. Then we need to find a way to protect both J.B. and his family." Martha held Helen's hands. "I've already thought about that. I have contacts in the FBI who can act quickly if we have enough evidence." "I have the evidence. The problem is how to use it without putting more people in danger." The two women spent the rest of the afternoon planning a desperate strategy. They knew they had only 2 days to save not only Helen, but also J.B. and his family, and possibly a whole network of victims of Robert's crimes. As the sun set that Thursday, Helen looked out the window at the familiar streets of her hometown and wondered if she would live to see another sunset after the fateful Saturday that was fast approaching. On Friday, the eve of the rodeo, Helen made a decision that could cost her life. While Robert was meeting with his criminal associates in town, she asked Martha to take her to the local sheriff's office. It was her last chance to try to resolve the situation through legal means. Sheriff Miller was a man in his 50s who had known Helen since she was a child. When she entered his office, he greeted her with the affection reserved for a beloved aunt, but his expression changed drastically when she began to relate her fears. "Miss Helen, with all due respect, what you're telling me is very serious. You're saying your own son wants to harm you." "It's more than that, Sheriff." Helen showed him the photographs of the messages from the burner phone. "Robert is involved with an organization that commits crimes in several states." The sheriff examined the images with growing attention, but Helen could see the reluctance in his eyes. Robert was an influential figure in town, a contributor to political campaigns who provided many local jobs through his companies. "Miss Helen, these messages, how did you get them?" "I found the phone he uses for these activities." "I see." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. "But you understand that accusing Robert Mendoza of federal crimes is a very serious matter. He's a respected businessman. He contributes to the growth of our town. And he's also a criminal who's planning to kill me tomorrow at the rodeo." The silence in the room was deafening. The sheriff looked at Martha, as if seeking support to classify Helen as mentally unbalanced. "Sheriff," Martha intervened firmly, "Helen is perfectly lucid, and there are witnesses to what she's reporting." "What witnesses?" "The boy, Pete, overheard Robert plotting with J.B. Batista to push Helen's chair into the arena during Black Devil's ride." The sheriff sighed deeply. "Mrs. Silver, with all due respect, the testimony of a street kid isn't considered reliable evidence in a court of law." Helen felt frustration building in her chest. "So what do you suggest I do? Wait for my son to kill me so you can investigate then?" "Miss Helen, if you truly believe you're in danger, I suggest you don't go to the rodeo tomorrow. Stay home, rest, and on Monday we can talk again when tempers have cooled." "And what about J.B. Batista and his family that's being threatened? If J.B. is involved in something illegal, he will be held accountable for his actions." Helen understood she would get no help from this man. Robert's influence in the town was greater than she had imagined, and even with evidence, the local authorities were unwilling to confront him. As they left the sheriff's office, Martha was visibly outraged. "This is absurd. How can he ignore such clear evidence? Because Robert has half this town in his pocket," Helen replied bitterly, "including the sheriff." "So what do we do now?" Helen looked at the overcast sky, sensing that the literal storm approaching was just a reflection of the emotional storm about to devastate her life. "Now we go home, and I'm going to try one last thing." When they arrived at the Mendoza house, Helen asked Martha to wait for her in the living room while she went to her room to get Robert's burner phone. She had made a desperate decision. She would call the contact saved in the device directly and try to negotiate for her own life. With trembling hands, she dialed the number saved as P. A male voice answered after the second ring. "Robert, I thought you lost this phone." "This isn't Robert," Helen said, mustering all the courage she possessed. This is Helen Mendoza, his mother." The silence on the other end of the line was icy. "How did you get this number?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that I have information about Robert that might interest federal authorities." "Keep talking. I know about the fraudulent contracts, the money laundering, everything, and I'm willing to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" Helen took a deep breath. "You call off whatever plan you have for tomorrow's rodeo, and I keep quiet about what I know." The man's laugh was sinister. "Mom, I don't think you understand the situation. We're not the kind of people who make deals with civilians." "So you're the kind of people who kill elderly mothers in wheelchairs. We're the kind of people who solve problems, and your existence has become a problem." The line went dead, leaving Helen alone with the terror of having confirmed her worst suspicions. This wasn't just about a greedy son. Robert had gotten involved with professional criminals who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate any obstacle. When Martha came to check why she was taking so long, she found Helen crying silently, still clutching the phone. "Helen, what happened?" "I tried to negotiate with them. It was a terrible mistake." "Why?" "Because now they know I have the phone, and that means Robert will know too." As if her words had summoned fate itself, they heard the sound of Robert's car arriving. He was home, and from the hurried sound of his footsteps, he was extremely agitated. Helen quickly hid the phone and wiped her tears, but she knew it was too late. The last bridge had been burned, and now all that was left was to face the consequences of her desperate choices. Robert burst into the room like a hurricane, his eyes desperately searching for something. When he saw Martha still there, his face contorted with rage. "What is this woman still doing here?" "Martha is my friend, and she can stay as long as she wants," Helen replied, with a firmness that surprised even herself. "Get out of my house. Now." Robert pointed to the door, addressing Martha with a hostility he no longer tried to disguise. "I'm not leaving Helen alone," Martha retorted, crossing her arms. "Yes, you are, because if you don't leave peacefully, you'll leave the hard way." Helen felt the situation was about to explode. "Robert, stop it. You're behaving like an animal." "An animal?" Robert laughed hysterically. "Mom, you have no idea what it's like to be an animal, but you're about to find out." The threatening tone made Martha step closer to Helen's chair. "I'm calling the police. Call whoever you want. You think anyone is going to believe the two of you?" Robert pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Sheriff, Robert Mendoza." I need a squad car at my house. My mother is having a psychotic break, and there's a woman here disturbing our domestic peace." Helen couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her own son was using his influence to completely isolate her, creating a narrative where she would be seen as mentally unstable. "Robert, please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're my son. How did we get to this point?" For a moment, something flickered in Robert's expression. Helen saw a glimpse of the boy he had once been, lost and confused behind the mask of cruelty he had built. "Mom," he began, but was interrupted by the sound of his phone ringing. Helen recognized the ringtone. It was the burner phone she had hidden among the blankets. Her blood ran cold as she realized Robert had just discovered where the missing device was. Robert followed the sound to the bed, pulling back the blankets and picking up the phone. When he saw who was calling, his expression became even more desperate. "Hello?" Helen could hear the angry voice on the other end of the line, even from a distance. Robert answered in monosyllables, each "yes" and "I understand," sounding like a death sentence. When he hung up, he turned to Helen with an expression that mixed fear, anger, and something that looked almost like regret. "Mom, you had no right to touch this. I had the right to try and save my own life." "Save it," Robert laughed bitterly. "You just signed our death warrant, mine and yours." Martha, who had watched the entire scene in silence, finally spoke. "Robert, there's still time to change this. Turn yourself into the authorities. Tell the truth." "The truth?" Robert turned to her with wild eyes. "The truth is, I got involved with people who don't forgive mistakes. The truth is, if I don't solve my mother problem by tomorrow, they'll solve the problem of both of us in a much more painful way." Helen felt as if the floor had disappeared from under her. "What kind of people are they, Robert?" "The kind that kill entire families when someone disappoints them. The kind that don't leave witnesses." Robert ran his hands through his hair, visibly desperate. "Mom, when I started this, it was just a few shady contracts. Easy money. Nothing too serious. But one thing led to another. And now you're planning to kill your own mother to protect criminals. I'm trying to protect us both. You don't understand. They already know you have incriminating information. If I don't do what they want, they'll send others to do it, and those others won't bother making it look like an accident." Helen looked at the son she had raised, trying to find any trace of the sweet boy who used to run through the fields of her ranch. "Robert, listen to what you're saying. Are you trying to justify my murder as an act of protection?" "It's not murder!" Robert shouted, losing control completely. It's a necessary solution to an impossible problem." "It's murder," Martha said firmly, "and you still have time to choose a different path." Robert looked at the two women, his defenses finally crumbling. When he spoke again, his voice was broken, heavy with a pain that seemed to well up from the depths of his soul. "I didn't want it to come to this. I never did. But now it's too late to turn back. They're already in town. They've made the arrangements. Tomorrow at the rodeo during Black Devil's ride, either I fulfill my part of the deal, or we all die." Helen reached out her hand to her son, a final gesture of motherly love. "Robert, help me understand. Why did you let it get to this point?" Robert looked at her outstretched hand, but didn't take it. "Because I'm weak, Mom. Because when I saw all that money, all that power, I forgot everything you taught me about right and wrong. It's never too late to get back on the right path." "For me, it is." Robert straightened his shoulders, the cold mask returning to his face. "For me, it's too late." The sound of approaching sirens indicated the police were arriving, summoned by Robert himself. Helen understood that she was being thrown into a trap from which she might not be able to escape. The arrival of the police marked the beginning of the longest night of Helen's life. Sheriff Miller entered the house accompanied by two deputies, all with expressions that already showed which side they were on before hearing any explanation. "Miss Helen," the sheriff said in a paternally condescending tone, "Robert told me you've been a bit confused lately. Maybe it's best if Mrs. Silver goes home and lets you two sort this out as a family. Sheriff, I already explained to you this morning what's happening. Helen tried to keep her voice steady. Robert is planning to harm me at the rodeo tomorrow. Mom, please. Robert put on a concerned son expression that Helen knew was completely false. You've been having these episodes frequently. Maybe it's time we seek specialized medical help. Martha stepped forward. Sheriff, Helen is perfectly lucid. What's happening here is an attempt to isolate her so she can't report Robert's crimes. Mrs. Silver, the sheriff sighed impatiently, you're a nurse, not a psychiatrist. And besides, you're interfering in a delicate family situation. Helen realized she was being systematically discredited. Robert had orchestrated the situation perfectly, using his influence and people's predisposition to believe that an elderly woman in a wheelchair could be suffering from dementia. I want everyone out of my house, Helen said, with all the dignity she could muster, including you, Robert. Mom, this is my house too, and in your current state, I don't think it's safe to leave you alone. My current state. Helen felt her indignation rise. My only current problem is having a son who has become a stranger to me. The sheriff exchanged a look with Robert, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Miss Helen, how about you come with me to the station for the night, just as a precaution, so everyone can calm down? Helen understood it was a disguised arrest. If she went to the station, she would be completely isolated and defenseless against whatever Robert planned for the next day. I'm not going anywhere. This is my house, and I have the right to stay in it. Sheriff, Robert intervened smoothly, maybe it's best we let my mother rest. I promise to keep an eye on her tonight. Keep an eye on her sounded like a veiled threat that made Helen shudder, but the sheriff seemed to accept the suggestion as reasonable. All right, Mrs. Silver, you need to go home now. And Miss Helen, if there's any trouble, just give us a call. After the police and Martha left, Helen was alone with Robert for the first time since discovering his plans. The silence in the house was deafening, heavy with everything that couldn't be said. Mom, Robert finally spoke, his voice sounding tired. I wanted you to know that I really didn't want it to come to this. But it did. It did. He sat in a nearby chair, suddenly looking older than his 40 years. And now there's no turning back. Helen studied her son's face, searching for any sign of the boy she had raised. Robert, tell me something. At any point, during all these years building your empire of lies, did you think about what it would do to me? Robert looked away. I tried not to. It was easier that way. And now, how do you feel knowing that tomorrow you plan to push your own mother to her death? I feel like a monster, he admitted in a voice that was almost a whisper. Udi, but I'm a monster who has no other choices. Helen felt a pang of pain in her chest, not physical, but emotional. For a moment, she glimpsed the lost and frightened boy behind the criminal he had become. We always have choices, Robert. Until the very last moment, we always have a chance to do the right thing. The right thing, Robert laughed bitterly. The right thing would have been to never get involved with these people. The right thing would have been to follow your teachings about honesty and hard work. But it's too late for the right thing. Helen stayed awake all night, listening to Robert pace through the house like a caged animal. Sometimes she would hear fragments of whispered phone calls, confirmations of plans, last-minute adjustments. Once, she was sure she heard Robert crying in the next room, but when she moved to check, the sound had stopped. At 5 in the morning, as the first ray of sunlight began to illuminate the room, Helen made a decision. If this was to be her last day on Earth, she would not spend it as a helpless victim. There was one last card she could play, one last attempt to save not only herself, but also the son she was losing to the darkness. She needed to get to the rodeo before Robert realized what she was planning, and for that, she would need the help of the people who still believed in her. Pete, Martha, and perhaps even J.B. Batista, who was also being manipulated by forces he couldn't control. The day of the rodeo had arrived, and with it, the moment of truth that would define the fate of everyone involved in this plot of ambition, betrayal, and perhaps redemption. The day of the rodeo dawned with a sky full of dark clouds that perfectly mirrored the tense atmosphere gripping Harmony Creek. Helen awoke with a steely determination. If this was to be her last day, she would not die a helpless victim, but a woman who fought for the truth until the very end. The arena was already packed when Helen arrived, pushed by Martha, who had insisted on accompanying her despite Robert's protests. The familiar smell of dust, leather and barbecue smoke mingled in the air, but this time it brought an ominous feeling instead of the usual nostalgic comfort. "Helen, we can still leave," Martha whispered, positioning the wheelchair in the accessible seating area near the main stands. "No, if I run now, Robert wins, and other people will suffer the consequences." Robert arrived a few minutes later, accompanied by the two men from Dallas. His eyes met Helen's across the crowd, and she saw in them a mixture of determination and sorrow that confirmed her worst fears. He fully intended to go through with the plan. Pete appeared out of nowhere, as he always did, approaching Helen's chair with a worried expression. "Miss Helen, are you sure you want to be here?" "I'm sure, sweetie, but I need you to do something very important for me." Helen took the boy's hand. "When they get to Black Devil's ride, I want you to grab the announcer's microphone and tell everyone what you heard Robert planning. But nobody will believe me. They'll believe it when they see what's about to happen. Do you promise you'll do it?" Pete nodded gravely, understanding the importance of the mission he was being given. The competitions began with the traditional events: team roping, bull riding, barrel racing. With each passing event, Helen felt the tension mount. She could see J.B. Batista in the competitor's area, visibly nervous, avoiding her gaze. When they announced the bareback riding, Helen knew the time had come. Black Devil was brought into the arena amidst admiring and fearful murmurs from the crowd. The animal was truly impressive. A stallion as black as night, with powerful muscles and wild eyes that reflected the floodlights. Robert discreetly approached the area where Helen was positioned. His movements were calculated, and she realized he had studied every detail of the plan. J.B. also positioned himself strategically, close enough to act when he received the signal. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed across the arena, "the moment you've all been waiting for, the ride of the legendary Black Devil." Helen felt her heart pound. This was it. She signaled to Pete, who began to move toward the announcer's booth. But Robert had noticed the movement and subtly blocked the boy's path. The first rider was thrown in less than 3 seconds. The second didn't even last 2. With each ride, Black Devil grew more agitated, more dangerous. Helen could see Robert making discreet signals to J.B., preparing for the right moment. It was then that something unexpected happened. One of the men from Dallas approached Robert and whispered something in his ear. Robert's expression changed instantly, from determination to absolute panic. "What's happening?" Helen murmured to Martha. Her answer came in the form of men in suits entering the arena discreetly. Federal agents, she realized. Someone had tipped off the FBI, and they were being arrested right here during the rodeo. Robert looked around desperately, realizing he was cornered. In his desperation, he did something no one expected. He ran towards Helen, screaming, "If I'm going down, you're coming with me." J.B., confused and frightened, thought this was the signal. In a knee-jerk reaction, he pushed Helen's chair toward the arena, just as Black Devil was being prepped for the next ride. The crowd screamed in horror as they saw the elderly woman in a wheelchair being pushed into the arena with the most feared bull in the region. Helen felt terror wash over her as she neared the animal, which was snorting and pawing at the ground. But then, something happened that no one would ever forget. Black Devil stopped. The bull, which had thrown dozens of experienced riders, simply froze when he saw Helen approaching. His wild eyes calmed, and he lowered his head, As if recognizing something special in this frail woman in her wheelchair, Helen, operating on pure instinct, held out her hand. To the astonishment of the entire arena, Black Devil delicately approached and nuzzled his snout against her fingers, like a house cat seeking affection. The silence in the arena was absolute. Thousands of people watched, dumbfounded, at a scene that defied all logical explanation. The woman who was supposed to have been killed by the region's fiercest bull was stroking him as if he were a pet. It was in this moment of sacred silence that Pete managed to reach the microphone. Pete's voice echoed through the arena's speakers, cutting through the reverent silence that had fallen over the crowd. "Everyone, please, listen. That lady in the arena, Miss Helen, she was in real danger." The boy spoke with an urgency that made thousands of people turn their attention to his words, even as they remained mesmerized by the impossible scene of Helen caressing Black Devil. Robert, her son, he paid J.B. Batista to push her chair in there right when the bull was wild. They wanted it to look like an accident, but it was meant to kill Miss Helen. A murmur of shock swept through the arena. Robert, surrounded by federal agents, tried to shout that the boy was lying, but his voice was drowned out by the crowd, which was beginning to understand the gravity of what had almost happened. J.B. Batista, paralyzed with guilt and the horror of what he had done, fell to his knees in the dirt of the arena. "It's true," he cried, his voice thick with despair. "He paid me to do it. He promised me $50,000. I didn't want to, but my family was struggling." J.B.'s public confession triggered a chain reaction. People in the audience began to shout in outrage, some trying to climb the rails to confront Robert. The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. It was then that Helen, still stroking Black Devil, who remained docilely by her side, asked for someone to bring her a microphone. When she was finally able to speak, her voice rang out, clear and strong, across the arena. "My friends," she began, "for 40 years, you have known me as an honest woman. Today, my own son tried to take my life to protect secrets that could destroy many innocent families." Robert, even in handcuffs, screamed, "She's lying, she's delusional." But Martha had already approached the federal agents, handing them the photographs of the incriminating documents Helen had secured. "Here is the evidence of Robert Mendoza's crimes: fraudulent contracts, money laundering, a bribery of public officials." The lead agent quickly examined the documents and nodded to his subordinates. "Robert Mendoza, you are under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, bribery, and attempted murder." As Robert was led away, he looked one last time at Helen. For an instant, she saw in his eyes a flicker of the boy he had once been, scared, lost, and full of regret. But it was too late for regrets. "Mom!" he yelled over the roar of the crowd. I'm sorry." Helen held on to Black Devil, who stood by her as if he were her designated protector. "I'm sorry too, Robert. I'm sorry for the man you chose to become." J.B. Batista was taken away by the local deputies, but Helen pleaded for clemency for him. "This man was as much a victim as I was," she said. "He was manipulated by someone who knew his vulnerabilities. I hope the justice system takes that into account." Maria, J.B.'s wife, ran into the arena with their children, all of them crying. Helen beckoned them over and, from her wheelchair beside the bull that had become her guardian, she held the family's hands. "You won't have to struggle anymore," she promised. "I will make sure J.B. gets a second chance when he gets out, and that your children have the opportunities they deserve." The crowd, which minutes before had been ready to lynch those involved, now watched in respectful silence at Helen's display of compassion and forgiveness. Many were crying, touched by the dignity of this woman who had faced death with such courage. Pete ran down from the stands and threw himself into Helen's arms. "Miss Helen, you're okay. I'm okay, my angel. Thanks to your courage." Helen kissed the boy's forehead. You saved my life. Sheriff Miller approached, visibly ashamed. Miss Helen, I apologize. I should have believed you. What's important is that the truth came out, Helen replied with generosity, and that others won't suffer what I almost did. Black Devil, who had remained calm throughout the entire ordeal, seemed to bow his head to Helen. It was an image that would be forever etched in the memory of everyone present. A 68-year-old woman in a wheelchair, commanding the region's fiercest bull, who treated her as if she were a queen. Sometimes, Helen said to the silent crowd, the most feared beings are the ones who need the most understanding and love, and sometimes those who should protect us are the ones who hurt us the most. The night that should have ended in tragedy was transformed into a lesson on forgiveness, courage, and the strength of genuine love. Helen had not only survived her own son's betrayal, but she had turned her near death into a victory for human dignity over greed and cruelty. 2 years after the rodeo that forever changed Harmony Creek, Helen Mendoza awoke on a sunny Saturday morning to the familiar sound of laughter echoing from her property. From the window, she could see Pete, now 14 and officially her adopted son, helping other youngsters care for the horses at what had become the Helen Mendoza Equine Therapy and Rehabilitation Center, Black Devil, affectionately renamed Guardian, grazed peacefully nearby, supervising the activities as if he were the official protector of the place. The bull, that was once a symbol of ferocity, was now the star of a therapy program that helped children with disabilities and seniors undergoing rehabilitation. "Good morning, Mom," Pete said, entering the room with a breakfast tray. The word "Mom" rolled off his tongue naturally, filled with all the love and gratitude he felt for the woman who had transformed his life. "Good morning, my son." Helen smiled, watching how the skinny, malnourished boy from 2 years ago had grown into a strong, confident young man. "How are our guests today?" Mrs. Johnson managed to stand on her own for 5 minutes yesterday afternoon. And Carlos, the little boy who arrived last week, is already able to brush Starlight all by himself. Helen felt her heart warm. Each small victory for her patients was a personal one, proof that she had managed to turn her pain into something positive and constructive. Martha appeared at the door, carrying folders with reports. At 64, she had found a new purpose in life as the center's medical coordinator. "Helen, I just got a call from the State University. They want to do a documentary about our work here." "A documentary about how we turned a personal tragedy into a project that has already helped over 200 people. They think our story could inspire other places to create similar programs." Helen looked out the window again, seeing the children laugh as they interacted with the horses, and felt a deep gratitude for the path her life had taken. The property Robert had built with dirty money now served to heal wounds and restore hope to those who needed it most. "And JB?" Helen asked. "How is he adjusting?" "Very well," Martha replied. "The therapy is working, and he's proven to be an exceptional instructor with the horses. The kids love the rodeo stories he tells." J.B. Batista had served only 8 months of his sentence, his term reduced thanks to the clemency Helen had requested from the judge. When he was released, she had hired him as a riding instructor at the center, giving him the second chance she had promised. Maria and the children now lived in a small house on the property, and the family had found the stability they had always sought. "Miss Helen?" Pete hesitated, as he always did when he wanted to bring up a sensitive topic. A letter came from Robert. Helen had received many letters from her son over the past 2 years. Letters full of regret, pleas for forgiveness, and reports on how prison had made him reflect on his choices. She answered everyone because despite everything, she was still his mother. What does he say this time? That he's been accepted into the inmate education program. He's going to finish his high school diploma and maybe even go to college. And he says, Pete paused, searching for the right words. He says he's proud of what you've done with the property. Helen nodded silently. Robert still had 15 years of his sentence left, but his letters showed signs that perhaps, finally, he was finding his way back to the man she had raised. "Pete, I'm going to tell you a secret," Helen said, taking the young man's hand. "For a long time, I thought I had failed as a mother, that if Robert had become a criminal, it was because I hadn't taught him enough about values. But that's not true. No, it's not. I've learned that everyone is responsible for their own choices. I gave him love and taught him values. What Robert did with those teachings was his decision." Helen smiled. "But with you, I have a second chance at being a mother, and this time, I know I'm doing it right." In the afternoon, while watching a therapy session where a little girl with cerebral palsy managed to balance on Guardian's back, Helen reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Robert's betrayal had nearly destroyed her, but it had also revealed a strength she never knew she possessed. "Martha," she said, "remember when you told me I needed to trust my instincts?" "I remember. My instincts tell me our story isn't over yet, that this center will grow, help even more people, and show the world that it's possible to turn pain into healing." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in golden hues that reflected off the coats of the grazing horses, Helen positioned her chair in the center of the yard. She was surrounded by her new family, Pete, Martha, Jay, Bea, and Maria with their children, and dozens of patients who had found hope at her facility. Guardian approached, as he did every evening, nuzzling his snout into her hand in a ritual of affection that had become sacred between them. Helen stroked the bull that had saved her life by refusing to harm her and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me that even the most wounded hearts can learn to love again." The woman who was once nearly a victim of greed and cruelty had become a symbol of resilience, forgiveness, and transformation. Her story would be told for generations, not as the tragedy of a mother betrayed by her son, but as the triumph of a woman who chose to turn her pain into healing for the world. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Helen smiled, knowing she had found her true purpose. The arena that almost witnessed her death had become the cradle of a new hope, and the heart that was nearly destroyed by betrayal now beat with enough love to heal hundreds of other wounds.